let's talk in terms of the fact that the virus is creating a major element of uncertainty. And so we have to deal with it. Forecasting it is very precarious. All we can forecast is that it ultimately will disappear. It has over the generations, and I say generations, because this type of problem, one way or another of the virus, has confronted us periodically, and they're always a little bit different. But I think we're in the later edges of it. But behind that is a more fundamental issue, which is likely to really take hold over the period ahead, and that is the aging of the population.
Put some numbers around that if you can. What are you looking at that's telling you about that aging of population?
Well, first of all, I have a whole series of data, but the fact that the population is aging is very obvious from all the data that are really available, both for the United States and for the rest of the world, because it has a fantastically important impact on economic behavior. And the reason essentially is that when the population is aging, something fundamental happens, and the major issue is that people start to retire. People don't retire until they basically can no longer function. The issue of pensions, the issue of various different social security benefits didn't exist in those days. And what we're finding now is that there's been a very significant expansion, specifically in social security benefits. That in turn is creating a major decline or slowing in the rate of growth in gross domestic savings.
So Alan, explain how that works exactly, because spending more money on old people in itself doesn't sound evil. They spend that money, it can help the economy, but the money has to come from somewhere. Where is it coming from?
Well, it's basically the issue of when we're dealing with gross domestic savings, which is fundamentally what's coming out of the private sector, we're finding that what the data show actually is that when you get a very significant increase in social benefits, they crowd out the current demand, the current supply, I should say, of gross domestic savings. If you curtail gross domestic savings, you will also curtail gross domestic investment, which is the key to economic growth, because fundamentally it generates all the economic activity that we get in the capital goods markets. And so I'm very much concerned about this. We I don't know how we're going to get out of it very quickly.
And when we talk about investment, capital investment, normally the thing we think about is productivity and growth and productivity. Are we seeing productivity flatten out in the United States because of the phenomenon you described?
Well, very much so, for the reasons I was about to get to. If you look at the data, what you begin to see is that productivity growth has slowed down very dramatically. I actually have a chart here, which I think you have one as well. I don't know whether you want to show it around, but what it is it's a pattern of productivity growth, which is going up and then flattening out. And the basic reasons for it flattening out is that we're getting a significant increase in entitlements crowding out gross domestic savings, which is the core of gross business savings, business investment, I should say, and that's where economic growth is coming from. Productivity in the most recent data is 1% a year. That is down very significantly from earlier periods, and it's beginning to show up in ways which suggest that the intermediate period ahead of us is going to be a period of slow economic growth. I don't think we're falling back into the types of problems we've had over the past year. Enough that we know very little about how the issue of the virus is going to work its way out. We have a lot of tests, we have a lot of evidence, we have a lot of plans, but the average age of the population we know with a high degree of accuracy, and we know the implications of it, and it is creating a significant increase in Social Security benefits, which in turn are driving capital investment down.
So we're crowding out savings, as I understand it, and it's not getting invested in capital facilities. It's reducing productivity. But is it because we're not saving enough? Because we talked, actually, one of my colleagues talked earlier this week with Janet Yellen, someone you know well, you've served with, about the question, and she thinks actually the problem is secular stagnation because she thinks there's too much savings. Listen to what Janet Yellen had to say on Monday.
Now we're faced with a world characterized by secular stagnation. There is a surfeit, too much saving in the global economy, especially among developed countries, and weak investment demand. And it's been pushing down real rates of interest and depriving monetary policy of a lot of the ability it had to address economic weakness.
So, Alan, do you disagree with Janet Yellen? Do you think on this question there's too much savings or too little savings?
No, it's a different way of looking at it. She and I worked together in the same environment for years, and I know her quite well, and I know how she thinks. I think the better way of looking at it is, from an analytical point of view, is that the savings that are going on generally, and our data is going back a long period of time, it's a stable percent of GDP until we began to get big increase in retirements, people retiring, going on Social Security, and the Social Security in turn crowding out the existing levels of capital savings, which is what a lot of people talk in terms of. Well, I think the data are very clear on this issue. If you can continue we have to cut back on entitlements. We have too much of it. Ideally, we would basically increase the rate of retirement that is the key element in Social Security benefits. That is almost politically impossible. And the fact that it's not is one of the major problems I have. I mean, if I were to say what we were to do, is essentially we would raise the age limit for when people can retire, as we used to over the generations when it began to rise. I know that the chances politically of that happening are zero or less, but they're going to change because they're going to have to change.
What are the underlying issues that you're watching, Alan, in the economy that you're concerned about that go beyond COVID-19 and shutdowns?
Well, let's talk in terms of the fact that the virus is creating a major element of uncertainty. And so we have to deal with it. Forecasting it is very precarious. all we can forecast is that it ultimately will disappear. It has over the generations, and I say generations, because this type of problem, one way or another in the virus, has confronted us periodically, and they're always a little bit different. But I think we're on the later edges of it. But behind that is a more fundamental issue, which is likely to really take hold over the period ahead, and that is the aging of the population.